Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time poor but enthusiasm rich primary teachers. This week, I'm joined by Neil Almond and Matt Swain. How are you guys? You all right?
Yeah, good. Yeah, good. Been listening this morning. It's been good. I've just got back from a 3-day sort of jaunt to the Midlands, which involved a 7-hour journey there, and then breaking down yesterday and a 10-hour journey back, thanks to the wonders of the AA recovery service. So, yeah, I'm quite glad to be just sat here chatting to you, like drinking some water. And although my hoodie's quite tight today, I've had a very sort of Henry VIII Christmas, right? So I've eaten well. So I just, anyway, no more cheese. Yeah, this will be nice. I'll do my best today to sort of talk about what we've been up to down here in East Sussex. Yeah, at some point I'll sort of streamline this into an actual talk. But for now, I'll try and ramble my way through it. And hopefully it'll be interesting because I think we've tried to do something quite unique down here. So,
excellent. For a bit of context, in case anyone isn't sure, you guys both work for the TDaPE Academy Trust.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Matt, you are, is it fair to say, deputy head of the teaching and learning team?
No, I'm head of teaching and learning.
That changed over the summer, didn't it?
Yeah. No, I've changed job titles almost every year. So I was deputy director of the hub, so that was a very different role. That was kind of outwards facing. This is all of last year, rolling out the ECF and the MPQs to East Sussex, Brighton and Hove. That's a really different job actually, and I learned loads from it, and I took a lot into what I'm doing this year. But I started this year. I kind of missed the classroom. I kind of felt I started to have a conversation about what we're doing now, whether we could do something smarter. And so I sort of rejoined the inwards facing part of STEP as head of teaching and learning, and with an aim to have our schools collaborate like at a higher level than I guess most schools in Matt's do. I kind of felt there was a missed opportunity and wanted to take lessons I've learned from last year, kind of working at scale, and other things I've learned from working teacher education and from being a leader in schools, to try something new with the backing of STEP and obviously the head teachers down here. So what we're trying to pull off here wouldn't work without a lot of head teachers having a bit of faith in us to do that. So yeah, so I'm currently head of teaching and learning for East Sussex, and currently got 5 schools working as one, and with the aim of possibly some more joining soon.
Nice. And then Neil, you are deputy head for South London, so you've got your
Southeast London.
You've got your whole domain.
They wouldn't give me everything.
Do you raise taxes in that area? Is that
I
like a sheriff?
Paying tithes, right?
Pretty much how it works. Yeah.
But
I can just walk into any school in Southeast London, and they know me, and it's fine.
Yeah, but you guys get to collaborate on stuff during the week because you're here, there, and everywhere, Neil. As part of your role. Matt, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah.
You've made changes, you've alluded to them, to the way your teachers and schools plan collaboratively. Can you describe the system you have in place now?
Yeah, I'll try my best. As I said, this will be better in time when I turn into an actual talk. Okay, so as things were, we have 5 schools in East Sussex. We had 4 in Helsham, 4 different schools in Helsham. 3 one-form-entries and 2 form-entry, all of which have outstanding affiliation with the new Ofsted, all doing really well under the new Ofsted. Bertha went most recently, had outstanding in all the categories but Q of E. Okay, and they were collaborating in a way and in a sense, right? So the planning was put on a shared drive, but there's no real formula to it, and the curriculum, I guess, wasn't maybe specific enough for people to sort of like be to using it in the same way in different schools. Another school joined us, joined the trust at Telscombe Cliffs, which is not too far away, like 30 minutes down the road. But a large 3 form-entry school joined. And they just had RI in the new Ofsted, but had loads of potential, right, as a school. But obviously needs some support. And I guess I started talking to Jeremy Meek, who's was executive head, and Tim Mills, the executive head to the school of those schools down here, about maybe thinking about a smarter way of working together, sharing the expertise that we developed in Helsham and the 4 schools there. Wider, really. I mean, it's a challenge, isn't it? But there's lots of challenges in lots of different ways. So Telscombe Cliffs, this 3 form-entry school, had challenges just because of where it was. Its legacy was its challenge, really. Lots of new teachers, 10 ECTs in the school, all being mentored, but 10 ECTs. I mean, that in itself brings benefits but challenges. And then we had the 4 schools in Helsham, but 3 of them were one form entry, and anyone knows, one form entry is hard, right? You've got a very small staffing body, and you're relying on a limited pool of expertise. Although we had lots of it, and we just started to talk last year about whether it was possible to literally just work as one school. So is there a way of working smarter? So one of the things I've considered is just, there's a lot of talk about, and good talk, I'm chatting to Andrew Purcell about this and a few other people about designing good curriculum. Okay, so and there's a lot of great talk about designing really good progression documents and so on and so forth, and specifying what you want and having a really good journey for pupils from EYFS to year 6. But for me, the challenge with that always is to converting that into lessons. Okay, so you can have this amazing progression map for every subject, but but you need time to convert that into really effective lessons. And so if you take like the normal PPA session, which is about 2 hours 50, give or take, I think, and you say if you assume there's like about 25 hours of teaching a week to deliver across 11 or so subjects, then if you do a little simple maths, that gives a normal, in a one form entry school, of which in this 3 were one form entry, that gives a classroom teacher in year 4 around 6 minutes to plan every hour of teaching. That's a problem, isn't it? That's a challenge, isn't it? It doesn't matter how smart they are, how skilled they are, how much they know about every single subject. If we say the PPA is the time they plan, and if we say that's the time they spend on planning preparation, then that gives them around 6 minutes per hour of teaching. And if they were, and most teachers will spend most of that time on maths and English. So you can have these amazing progression maps for RE and geography and history and art and D teams and so on and so forth. But if there isn't the time to think about those lessons and to plan really effective, sequences of learning, then it's all kind of for nothing, isn't it, right? And I keep coming back to time being this massive currency in schools. And so we can all sort of parade out our sort of brilliant curricula, but if we don't allow our teachers the time to think about those lessons and to plan them, then what we intended to happen, to quote Ofsted, doesn't get implemented and then doesn't have the impact it's meant to have, right? And that's what a great quality education is. It's like a really specific curriculum, which is ambitious but not too ambitious. So that's there for all, which is implemented with fidelity in the classroom, and then with pupils doing tasks that look like that represent what they're meant to learn, and then them remembering and doing work that represents what they're meant to learn. And what we found and what we often found was that started to fall apart because there just wasn't the time to do it. And so I just thought to myself, well, what if we got them to work together, right? So I spent a lot last year for the first time working with secondary schools because I was head of the appropriate body. And the ECF, we deliver to everybody, special schools, secondary schools. And one thing I picked up last year is that, secondary schools are huge, and departments planned collaboratively, and that allowed for more time to be spent on planning each lesson. So I kind of thought we may be missing a trick, right? What if we take these 5 schools with 9 forms of entry, and we get them to run off the same curriculum, because it has to be the same curriculum, but plan together. So instead of one teacher in one form planning 25 hours of lessons, you've got 9 teachers across the year group planning those 25 hours. And do you know what that gives them? About an hour per lesson. So mathematically, that's just better, isn't it, right? So suddenly these really well thought through progression maps, that you've spent time and care on, start to turn into great lessons, because smart people are given an hour to think about and plan each one. Obviously, that requires faith in the system, doesn't it? Right? that requires everybody to step up and everyone to spend that time. But it's not surprising that teachers do care about lessons, and they do. And so what? And we're just talking about the club. There's a planning element now, and there's lots and lots of parts to this. And so I apologise for not articulating it very well. And we'll come back to the curriculum in a second. But broadly, what happens as far as planning goes is that within a planning group of 9 teachers, each term, people they assign the different subjects to each other, and and we have 2 on maths, 2 on English, and then one person on 2 foundation subjects each. And they have about 2 hours a week in their PPA to plan those 2 lessons. And then for the other 35 minutes of PPA, they meet online and share the planning. Okay, they talk through the lessons. They write a primer for each of the lessons they've put together, and this was from them. This came from them, the idea of a primer. Something that I came across last year, but something that they wanted, which will have any key explanations scripted on there, any key questions and the answers, any key vocabulary, how it's pronounced, that helps the teacher take that really good lesson and deliver it in class. And what you get when you get 9 people is you can start to play to strengths then, right? So you can have the teacher who's particularly strong at planning the art, and the teacher that's particularly strong at planning the history. And you may have a new teacher who's not particularly strong, but they can co-plan. You can start to facilitate this and this sharing of expertise. So if I'm an ECT or a teacher that's not competent in planning or delivering art and never has been, but somebody with a real specialism has planned this sequence of lessons for me and talks me through each one, then I suddenly start to become more expert. And what this means is, hour for hour, the kids are just getting a better deal. There's a lot of work gone into the curriculum itself, the intended curriculum, but what we were seeing, it wasn't converting all the time. Our most recent Ofsted was Burfield. We got good for QV. They were pretty vocal about the core subjects being more in the outstanding category. But what we were seeing was, there's some variation in foundation, which you're going to get when you've got one form-entry schools and people with 2 minutes to plan stuff. And so this, I guess, initially was kind of like just a bit of maths, right? What if we gave people more time? Would that benefit them? Would that reduce their workload but increase the quality of education that people's got? And I came this year, and this is a small part of it, thinking, well, I think it should. And we're a term in, and it does. And we can talk about the assessments we've got in place to check on that. But I can tell you the feedback from teachers around their work-life balance is nothing but positive. They're doing their planning in their PPA session, yet they're getting 25 hours of really strong planning. They're getting primers for every lesson on a piece of paper they've got in front of them while they're teaching, that's helping them make sure that they're delivering exactly what was intended. And those lessons that they'd been less confident in teaching before are working in classrooms. They've just delivered a great art lesson, but they've never delivered one before. And their confidence is increasing, their own sort of expertise is increasing. And so in that sort of, that video call they have every week, and that sounds like, well, you're taking 40 minutes of their PPA off them. So that seems a bit wrong. But it's kind of like, it's kind of like the opportunity cost. If you do that, then you only have to spend 2 hours playing 2 lessons, right?
That's the difference between what we're doing and going to a resource that provides all the slides and worksheets for you, is that you are not getting the thinking behind why that person has designed that slide the way they've done it, why they've designed that worksheet the way you get it, which is why, teaching off other people's planning, certainly my experience, has always been like really difficult. But what this kind of layer does is ensure that every teacher understands kind of that hard thinking behind why this works. And so it's, it works in that regard. And I'd say that's why we think it's better than, it's not just, everything's on the system for you. You can walk in that day and, download the slide deck and send the worksheets to the printer. There is a layer above that.
Well, I think it's about increasing the mean, isn't it? Right. So what's the mean quality of your lessons across all your schools? We've got some incredibly strong schools, and we could say, well, we'll just stay here and be an incredibly strong school, and you catch up when you can. Or you could say it's about the 2,000 pupils as a whole, and giving them the best deal you possibly can, right? And so we've had EIP visits for Telscombe, which is probably a really good sort of like barometer. So that's an education improvement partner, sort of local authority, sort of Ofsted equivalents, I guess. Which is whatever it is. But they see a lot of schools, so they probably know a little bit about stuff. They came to visit Telscombe, maybe 2-3 weeks before the end of term, and were confident in the Q of E being outstanding after a term, right? But that's because it's not Telscombe. They're looking at 5 schools working together. They're looking at the expertise of 5 schools, the expertise of 9 teachers in year 6, 9 teachers in year 5, more than that in EYFS, all working together and sharing experience. And obviously it doesn't mean that like every lesson's blinding, right? There's still people sort of like, there's still lessons that don't quite work, but it gives you systems to support with that. So in this PPA meeting every week, so we have a PPA meeting for every set, for every year group. And obviously behind this is all the PPAs synchronized. So year 6 is in the same time in every school, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, reception and nursery. A teaching and learning leader facilitates each session. So we have teaching and learning leaders nominated in every school. So and they're part of a bigger system, which we'll talk about later. But they sort of like host the session. Okay, they're not to do anything but host it, but also to deal with any queries. So if there is an issue around the planning of a history lesson in year 4, then they're able to support with that. Okay, they can support that year 4 teacher. Maybe it's a new teacher and they're ECT and they're not quite sure about something. Then they'll get some support. They can notice that in the session. They can notice, that maybe needs a bit of work on that one, and they'll then communicate with the T&L lead from their school, who'll then give them some support. Does that make sense? Right. So there's this beneath that. You're not just saying, well, every lesson's going to be perfect, but we've got systems to support the planning where it needs to be planning, and it's super responsive, right? In what school have you got eyes on planning? Just out of interest, it doesn't happen. What leaders know what's happening in the plan at the planning stage? What we tend to do is look at implementation. We tend to look at a learning walk once every 6 or 8 weeks, possibly for a subject. At which point they've been taught 6 or 8 lessons that could have been not very good or not very effective. On a weekly basis, we've got eyes on the planning. And we can direct support to help people, develop their planning in certain areas. It's a really collaborative, really sort of powerful model that genuinely feels like people, happily sharing expertise, but also happily asking for support where they need it, right? And that's kind of one level of it. So I've just talked about the planning so far.
No, I mean, you say it's not or you need to work on a talk, but last time you did 45 minutes without taking a breath whenever we did our first interview together. and I mean, it sounds fantastic. I mean, you could do that 20 minutes and, people will be like, okay, yes. I mean, Emma's asking about the logistics, and I think you've gone somewhere to explain the logistics, in terms of PPAs at the same time. Who has the oversight of this? Is this your role, Matt, within the trust, or have you delegated to someone else to make sure this logistically takes place?
Yeah, I suppose it's probably best to talk about the systems that are beneath it, because this is like a really small component of a bigger thing. We have sort of 3 teams, 4 teams really, that kind of make this whole thing work. So we have sort of learning design team. Okay, so there's actually, let me take this back a section. Right, let's go with, first of all, how the school's set up. Each school's got a head of school. They'll have their deputy assistant heads depending on the size of them. But within that SLT, there'll be a nominated teaching and learning lead. Okay, and for 1 day a week, they'll come and work with me together. Okay, and that's part of the quality of education team. Okay, that's what we call it. And so there'll be 5 of those at that meeting. They will all run one of those PPA sessions. Also, that quality of education meeting is our head of EYFS, our head of SEND, and one of our executive head teachers, Jeremy Meek, which are bringing that leadership perspective, that EYS perspective, and the SEND perspective. Okay, so that's what sits behind this as a kind of monitoring mechanism. So each week we meet and we get feedback from what's happening in the planning. Okay, so what's happening in planning, what we're seeing, where there are issues, where there are challenges, what's strong, what's not, so on and so forth. And that's fed back in that meeting. And that allows us to sort of triage that. So it might be fed back that in year 3 they're having some trouble. The math isn't working, maybe. The children find it too hard. Okay, let's have a look at that. Can we have a look? The maths team have a look at that. Can you support the year 3 with the planning of that? In that same meeting, it's really important. It was always really important for me to have all the perspectives. So we've got Dee Hughes, who's head of EYFS. We've got Karen. I forgot her new surname now. Hayward, right? Karen Hayward, who, and they're all there listening as well. So going, okay, so what's that looking like for our SEND pupils? What's that looking like for our EYFS pupils? And so that's that kind of system that brings back that intelligence from the planning. And now in those planning groups, if there are any challenges, if say I've got some the plan I'm giving for history isn't kind of working for my kids, then the person to contact is your T&L lead that runs the group. So any sort of queries and questions come back through those groups, so that we try and then solve. Like, the idea is to solve that. Now you might solve it in 3 ways. So you'll solve it. It could be individual bespoke support. It could be, okay, it's coming out that in year 3 the ECT is struggling with the planning of science. Okay, so first year they need some support. Okay, that teacher's in Telscombe, T&L in Telscombe. Can you give them support? Can we find someone to work alongside them? That's one level of support. The second level of support might be something that might be like across just one school. Okay, so there's some challenges around sort of the maths teaching in one school, in which case we'll start talking about what CPD that school can have. Okay, that will support that school. And finally, like the largest level of support we can give is kind of like, okay, we're seeing challenges across the piece with like history. And we found that actually interesting. I'll talk about history. So we found that history was something that people were, it didn't feel like history. Okay. It was a bit too IWU and not enough sort of thinking and inquiring. And we were hearing that from our teachers and from the pupils. And in that case, you go, okay, so what? Now it's a collaborative response, and so we respond to that with PD, okay, for all schools, which brings us on to the PD. So, as people may or may not know, across STEP we have 2 STEP CPD sessions a week, on Tuesday and Thursday, just 40 minutes long. We think it's a better model. Like it's shorter, it doesn't take up the rest of your day, and you can get something done quite quickly. It actually gives you more sort of, no more time, but it seems like more sort of sessions to play with. Every Tuesday now is a 5-school CPD session that goes to everybody at the same time, and that deals with moving our curriculum on. So stuff we're doing our own curriculum, or being responsive to things we're seeing in the classroom. And Thursday is the school's their own sort of bespoke CPD. So you can see how those 2 models work. So you might find a school that there's an issue with maths. Maybe we're not doing our checking for understanding well enough. That's a Thursday thing. If we're seeing that across all the schools, that's a Tuesday thing. Now, sitting behind the Tuesday PD is an entire another team. So now we've got a teacher education team. So I spent a lot of time writing CPD and hoping getting quite good at it, right? I mean, I'm very lucky to work with Harry Fletcher, and other people on the fellowship, and with all the guys in STEP. And hopefully these days I'm pretty good at it and understand what makes good PD. So, and Neil will know about this. So every Tuesday we deliver CPD to all our schools at the same time. And before it gets to them, this is what happens for it. So when we launched our foundation curriculum, there were some key bits of learning science wanted in every lesson. So let's say, for example, we want to do a bit of CPD on making links in learning. We want to be explicit part of the lesson at the beginning. We want to make sure that it involves the children actually thinking, retrieving, but also explicitly pointing in the right direction. So that piece of CPD would be 4 minutes long, was written and scripted by another team called the Learning Design team. And then on a Tuesday, that QV team we talked about earlier, get that delivered to them. They get delivered the CPD with a workbook, and in line with the sort of like EEF guidance on professional development. We assess it against those guidelines, and they give feedback to the author from a SEND perspective, from an EYFS perspective, and from year group perspective and school perspectives. That's redrafted by the Thursday, and it's scripted, like fully scripted. And then the following Tuesday, so the week later, on the day it's going to be delivered, the teacher education team, which is most of the teaching and learning leads really, rehearse and deliberately practice that session before going to the schools and delivering it at the same time to all the schools. So we've got this system, and that allows us to move this curriculum forward. And that allows us to develop things and be responsive where we need to be. So example would be history. So what came from that is a model history lesson. We wanted to, for whatever reason, history didn't feel very historical. It felt very sort of like, it felt very, very much like you were being told stuff all the time, and the children weren't thinking hard enough. And if there's one thing that's like, if there's one proxy of like learning, it's like kids thinking hard. As far as I'm concerned, right? If they're thinking hard, there's a good about like the subject, there's a good chance they're learning. They didn't seem to be thinking hard enough for history. That allowed us to script a model history lesson, deliver it to this QV team who gave suggestions to SEND and EYFS and so on and so forth to make it palatable, redraft it, and then deliver it over 2 weeks and 2 sessions on Tuesday and Tuesday to the schools to reframe how people planned and saw history. What did that lead to? Really good history being planned and being taught within weeks of that. So yeah, there's lots of systems behind it. There's 3 teams. There's 3 main teams. The QV team, which is there to monitor things and to respond to things and to deal with queries. Then you've got the teacher education team, which is there to deliver the PD. And then you've got the learning design team that are there to write the PD. Obviously, these teams need populating, so that takes support from schools. So the QV team is people giving their time up as leaders, and those teaching and learning leads being given a day a week to come over and work. The morning they spend in the QV team, the afternoon they spend in the teacher education team practicing. The learning design team is a larger team. Neil's a big part of that, and we meet on a Wednesday, and we're there to make design curriculum documentation, but also mainly to design the PD. Okay, and that's a very different. people in that team are less senior leaders and more really promising teachers in schools that are interested in this sort of thing. They come on a rotating basis, like a day every 2 or 3 weeks. We're a rolling team of about 5 every Wednesday, working on different projects. At a small cost to schools for what they get in return, I guess. Everyone feels it's really good value. You send someone every couple of weeks and you get your PD written for you, you get your curriculum written for you, you get documentation like so what we've just recently made. We just started making graphic organisers for all of our subjects. We've got rid of knowledge organisers because I don't think they're very useful. We've moved to graphic organisers, which I think are really useful, and we've trialled them and found them to be incredibly impactful in pupils retaining and recalling things. And so that is a rambly thing. I do need slides for this in the future, but that's kind of how it works. Behind it, all these systems. For schools and school leaders, they're having to commit their assistant head, normally a deputy head, for 1 day a week to us. That's a cost to them, isn't it? I mean, Tuesdays are pretty difficult in a small school. They are willing to do that because it means, in return, their curriculum, the quality of teaching in the classroom is constantly being supported. But it is an expense, right? And I was a bit worried it wouldn't work. It does seem like it is a little bit. Someone else, Adam Smith asked, what's the ideal size of Matt? We're not sure, right, Adam? So we're a large Matt. We're like 20 schools, I think, right? Large-ish, yeah. I think. We trialled this across 5. I don't think there's a real limit to it. I think you can probably hub it. I think you probably we're at 5 9 forms of entry at the moment. That's comfortable. I think you probably go a little bit higher to get even better value on the planning. But I think if we were to do it across a 20 school Matt, you'd probably hub it into 10 forms of entry. I think I imagine there's a sense the size of it becomes unworkable because just too many moving parts and too many people trying to be involved. But at the moment, it's working. It's surprisingly working. We've had 4 EIP visits, and all of them have said the same thing about the QV. So, and more broadly, they're more interested in the model, aren't they? Because actually, they're going, hold on, this is how you improve schools. Telscombe was, requires improvement less than 8 months ago, and here it is. Everyone's really happy. The kids are getting great lessons. The PD is really good, and this doesn't look like the school that was visited 9 months ago. Yeah, I guess I don't know what the limit is. We're not sure. There's some conversation within the trust at the moment about some other schools maybe looking at what we're doing in the trust. So it's not a trust-wide model. It's just a thing we're doing. But I definitely feel like 9's okay. 9 forms of entry. I think you'd probably push it to about 11, maybe. I think there's a point where it probably becomes a bit logistically complicated. But yeah, I mean, Neil and I have talked a little bit about this. How do you think it works if you make it bigger? I think probably you start to hub it at about 11 forms, just pod them off, right? Does that make sense?
Nice. I mean, that feeds really nicely into my next question. Neil, have you seen any impact of these changes so far? Obviously, because you travel around a lot of the schools in STEP. And what have you noticed? Obviously, because measurable impact, perhaps not, but what have you seen?
Yeah, so kind of 2 perspectives I can take on this. One is obviously because, as Matt said, this isn't a Matt-wide thing. So I'm 1 day a week on Friday. I'm deputy head in a 1 form entry STEP school, and we work together with some schools, but certainly not at the level like this kind of happens. So straight away, being the deputy head of a 1 form entry school, I know the pressure points of what staff are having to do in terms of as I say, having 6 minutes to plan every lesson, and they're a wonderful staff team. They do really well, but their life would be far much more easier, and they'd be far much more happier if they had far longer to plan fewer lessons. As I say, obviously, there's no kind of impact in terms of national outcomes at all, but I'm sure Matt will talk about this later on as well. In terms of the assessment side of things, they're kind of 3 kind of pillars. One of those pillars is people book study, so that's getting kids to come down with their books and talk to senior leaders. So there'll always be an SEN child in there. There'll always be a couple of kids who are pupil premium, etc., etc. And I think it's once every 2 weeks, Matt, we get our leaders to do that. And so because I've had some training on people book study, I was able to kind of give a bit of input. And so after that, you recorded one of the they're doing it for art. So it's if you want a rough a proxy of our kids actually learning more and remembering more from this kind of model, you take art, because unless you're an art specialist, no one does art very well, or certainly in my experience anyway. And the amount of knowledge that these kids had about perspective and, why you would choose a H1 over a H2 pencil, and, how this kind of links back to some work that they had kind of done like prior to that. That for me was a bit like a watershed moment. It was like, oh God, like, this probably really is, something. Because if you can get it out of the kid, I think talking to kids is the best form of one of the better forms of assessment that you can kind of have, because that's what it's not what it is what Ofsted do. It's not why we do it for Ofsted, but the fact that kids can actually sit there, and because, to say, the curriculum is it's well structured, and leaders just go around with that document, and they can kind of like ask those questions. So I see that you've been learning about perspective. You start quite open, and because the leaders know specifically what's been taught, you can then kind of narrow it down, that focus. Should pupils be struggling a little bit, because asking anyone what do you know about that straight away is always going to be a bit daunting. So definitely, I'm seeing some outcomes already, and I say I'm using art as that proxy, but I'm sure when we do some more pupil book studies after this half term, and there's been a whole term of this done, we'll feel more. And in terms of what I'm seeing, it's just like, now that the model's there, it's clearly working. Like, I can't see myself wanting to work in a school that isn't trying to, or not working with a similar model, because I think as a leader, particularly one form entry school, more about your school and what's actually happening in your school from one meeting with the Q&E team than you would do in a whole term of just being a leader.
Q&E team look at 3 levels, right? That's the idea. So we look at the planning. So first thing we feedback on is what's happening in the planning session, okay? And then every 2 weeks we look at the impact of a subject, okay, and the implementation. So we've done science, history, art, and RE is just being done at the moment. And so let's say we set up art to look at. We'll have a sense of what arts are going in the planning. So we've already got that sense anyway. We've been hearing that and looking at that over the term. And then the next 2 weeks, the teaching learners in each school will learning walk to look at the implementation. So learning walk the subject. So that'll be across at least 3 year groups, but hopefully more. But you have to be realistic within the confines of the school. They'll also pupil book study, and each one will do a different year group. So you'll do 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, art, and they bring that back to the meeting. Okay, so they have a pupil book study of art, and they'll walk art in their own school. So when they come back to that meeting in 2 weeks' time, we've got a snapshot of what pupils know in every year group. So pupil book study of every year group, because we'll have done all of them, because there's a leader of each PPA session, so they just do one each. Then we'll have a look at generally what it looks like in every school. That gives us unreal levels of data around a subject. How often do we really basically deep dive in your own subject? And we do it every 2 weeks. And you're like that, you can snapshot an entire subject. You can deep dive every year group and look at the delivery of the subject in every school over to every 2 weeks. Plus, you've got an eye on the planning of that subject, and you get this incredible picture of each subject. If we layer into that, then the ongoing assessment of the subject, you get even more. So sitting behind that is other progression maps, okay? So I'm going to talk about this because I think it's important. So and the big shout I haven't given so far is to Sarah Constant, who's my assistant head of teaching and learning, and just a genius, right? Like an absolute genius. And I'm really privileged to work with her. I'm privileged to work with everybody I work with, and everyone brings their expertise to the table. But this is the person who did the work on the curriculum and is helping it work. So one of the things we looked at this year is that if you want to collaborate and work on one curriculum, it's got to be really specific. It's got to specify exactly what they need to learn, or else it will look different in every school. And there can't be any ambiguity in the learning, because then in my experience, that's where it all starts to fall apart. An outstanding quality of education is about the intended curriculum being enacted in class exactly, and that being exactly what's remembered. So here's what I want them to learn, and then with no ambiguity, exactly that being taught in class, probably some in-class stuff, but that stuff being taught, and tasks being about that thing, that being what the children remember. And often where it gets fuzzy is because the intended curriculum is too vague. And so what they learn in one year is not what they learn the following year, because it might say, learn about the causes of the Industrial Revolution without specifying them. So that can mean different things to different people, can't it? Depending on what book you read. and what you prioritize. But we try to remove that. And Sarah spent an unreal amount of time working with the subject teams, and behind this, each school has a lead for each subject, which work together as a collaborative team for the subjects. But to be more specific in our progression map, so each lesson has an overriding question, and you'll see here there's 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of knowledge. 4 things we want to know. That's really specific, isn't it? That tells you exactly what you want to teach. And then here's probably the big shift this year in how we taught this, and probably why the children are remembering it all, is that the way this is taught is one step at a time. So normally in a lesson, and I don't know why we do this in foundation, not in other, we don't do it in maths. In maths, we teach something, and then once they're secure, we move on and we teach the next thing. But often in foundation lessons, we just have this massive eye session where we tell them about all these things. Then they go and do some talking about just a few of them. They do a task about maybe one of them. And not surprisingly, don't remember them all. So we thought, what if we just teach one at a time? I had a really good chat with Andrew Purcell about this. He's definitely thinking the same realms really, and doing exactly the same sort of brilliant work at his school at Stanley Road. Like, why are we treating this subject differently to these subjects differently to the core subjects? We know good learning science. We know teaching small steps is important. So teach everything in small steps. And so we designed our curriculum to be taught in small steps. So in their history lesson, which would be an hour and a half, they'll first learn that Sumerians are polytheistic. And they'll be taught that, and they'll do some discussion around that, maybe do a task on that. And then there'll be a hinge question to check they all know it. And if they all know it, the teacher will move on. And they'll explore the temples of worship that are called ziggurats. And they might be some looking at artifacts. There might be some inquiry about those artifacts. There might be some discussion. There may or may not be a task. And this might take 5 minutes. The thing before might have taken 20 minutes. And then we'll check with the hinge questions if they all get it. And if they all get it, we move on. And so what this means for the pupils in the lessons is that they are only moving on when they're secure, and that they're having to deal with less at any one time. They're not getting this deluge of information in one big lump at the start of a lesson. Then have to hold that in their working memory whilst they perform some task about parts of it, and then not really be sure what to remember afterwards. What they're meant to remember later on. This means that lessons, just over a lesson, you might spend 20 minutes teaching the first bit, 5 minutes on the second bit, 20 minutes on the next bit, 5 minutes on the next bit, and 30 on the last bit. But over that period, you don't move on to the next bit of information until you're sure they're secure. And that's been like a revelation, because that makes these documents a working document. For the teachers, it's really clear what needs to be taught. It's really clear what they need to secure in that lesson. It's also really clear what we need to retrieve in the future. So at the beginning of every lesson, like most schools, we'll have a retrieval quiz. And the lesson after this will have some of these bits of knowledge in that retrieval quiz, of course. Equally, when we come to assess them, when we have like a big quiz at the end of each unit, we'll go back and we'll pick a couple of sample pieces of knowledge from each lesson in that unit, probably front loading a few more from the first couple of lessons. And so then you get a really nice picture of what's been learned. So then suddenly the pupils, it's really clear to them, the pupils, they've told us this in the book studies, they like being taught the way it would be. It's really weird they told us that, actually. They like being taught in small bits because they know what they need to know and they find it easier to remember. So in a lesson, what our lessons look like are like 5 mini lessons. And it's so much better for pupils. Why are we not taking the learning science that we know works for other subjects and not applying it to these subjects like it's something different? Just teach little bits, right? And secure them before you move on. And so sitting behind all of us, so each of our subjects has a progression map that looks like this. Every single lesson or episode, because there may not be lessons, is specified. And at the end of each unit, we wanted pupils to be able to make links between the units. Now, I think the problem with that is, and I think I learned with How to Follow Truth, is to make things easier for people. So you can tell people it's really important to make links between learning. But unless you help the teachers do that, that's not useful. So we just told them what the links were. So you can see here, subject links, we just wrote them, made it really clear. And because all the progression maps look the same, then you can find your way around them. So as a teacher, you can say, okay, we're about to start to learn about the changes settling in civilizations brought about. Do you remember in the first term, when we looked at the transition from nomadic hunter-gatherers to civilizations. Well, we're going to start looking at what that started to look like. And then also there's cross-curricular links, right? Now, they're not forced, and lots of they're empty, but it's really important then that you help pupils not just link between the subject they're teaching, like forwards and backwards, or what they've learned before and what's coming, but also if they exist, where there are links across those other subjects. So all of this kind of sits here. So when you then come to book study with the pupil, the leaders sit there with the progression map and we'll just sit there and say to them, okay, can you tell me, what do you remember about the religious practices of the Sumerians? And the children will they'll start telling them this stuff. But obviously they'll go deeper because it's not, and hopefully they'll link all these ideas together, and they've shown us that they can. But then you've got this beautiful sort of like alignment between intent, implementation, and the main thing, impact. We want them to learn this. We taught them exactly this. We checked they understood this, and now they remember this. And what we're seeing, and what's probably the most heartening, is that this is working for pupils currently with SEND. It's working for people for PPG. It wasn't working for them before. We know from looking at our own subjects being taught, that some of our foundation subjects were not working for those groups of pupils. It was too much for them. Break it down to small pieces, it's much better. And so sitting behind, I guess, all of this work is a fully redesigned curriculum. They're all designed the same way. There's a lot more to talk about when it comes to curriculum, but for now, that broadly gives you an idea what sits behind this. So in those Q of E meetings, when we're looking at the implementation, we're walking with the progression map and seeing what the kids are being taught. And when we're looking at the impact, we're talking to the children with the progression map and assessing that that they know they've learned what we want them to learn. On top of that, we layer in some sort of quantitative data from their big quizzes, and we're starting to see this get a picture of kids learning exactly what we want them to learn, and not just some kids, all kids. And where they're not, we respond. Where they're not, we give support to that planning group, or we give broader direction to all the schools. Where things aren't working, we work on them. And what's been interesting, not everything's kind of worked, right? But lots weirdly has. And where it isn't working, we just fix it. Where it isn't working, we just respond and fix it. I guess I want to talk about the curriculum's a whole other conversation. And actually, there's a year's worth of work gone into that. It's an incredible piece of work, led by Sarah Constant. She's a stupidly smart girl, working to make this more digestible and useful. But it's paying off because it allows us to lean into the science we know works, right? Teach small pieces of information at a time. Use retrieval to increase retrieval strength. Use making links to increase storage strength, which will deepen their understanding. Check for, use hinge questions to check they know stuff before you move on. Check for understanding before you move on. All those things we know kind of work, right? But we were applying them to some subjects and not others. And then in our most recent Ofsted, as I said, that was kind of the opinion. There's some great lessons going on, but not everyone's accessing. And they weren't wrong. We already knew that. We're already working on it. Just maybe, just within a few more months. This, though, is working. And I would say there's definite parallels at Stanley Road. So I remember going to see I don't know her name now, the girl who does geography there. And I've chatted to Andrew quite a lot since. Right? We've had some really good chats about this. We're both seeing the same impact of this approach. It works for everything. Works for PE, works for art, works for RE. There's some adaptation to how you check for understanding. So in PE, you check for understanding by watching them, because there's a lot of procedural stuff going on. So it may not be you do a hinge question that is which of these is the correct definition, whatever it might be. But you might just watch them hold a hockey stick with the correct grip. But it's the same thing. Just do that, then move on. Do that, then move on. I knew this. I'd fly off on a tangent here, so apologies. But there's so much to talk about, because all of this, everything we're doing rests on a shared curriculum. It sits upon a shared curriculum, and that curriculum itself has to work, has to stand up, has to be smart and accessible. Probably should have started by talking about that, but I think maybe we're ending with talk about the curriculum itself. If anyone's interested in it, we're happy. We're going to post it on the website soon. We're not precious about it. We've done it for every single subject. So every single subject is thought through to that granular detail. If I could give you one tip coming out of this, at a school level, be really specific about what you teach children, and then let them just learn a bit at a time. It makes a massive difference, right? Anyway, I reckon I'm coming to the end now, and I've probably talked a lot and gone all over the place. This very much needs some slides and some thinking through, but hopefully it's been interesting, right?
Yeah, it's been wonderful. And I mean, Adam's asking about accountability.
As far as it goes, we've got executive heads over the schools. The accountability for what happens in the school is the teaching and learning team, I guess, but they're working as part of a whole. It's about like being willing to hand some of that over, right? So I'm ultimately accountable for the quality of education. Like so that's my job. That's my time. I'm quite happy it's going all right. As far as the school's grades go, the heads are about implementing it. It's on the heads, isn't it, right? But so we've got to make sure we don't let them down, and they have a choice to not collaborate. But for them, it's working. So who's accountable for their school's outcomes? The head teachers and their SLTs. This collaborative way of working is showing is I guess allowing them to to feel secure that they're doing the right thing for their pupils, right? Like we haven't had an offstage yet with this group. We have had 5 ERP visits, all saying the same thing. So we've had lots of people starting to pay attention to it, a lot of local authority interest. We haven't even got into like foundation assessment yet and all the other things we've got going on. But the point being, the accountability to the schools, I guess my name's over a lot of it, so I guess I'll lose my job if it goes wrong. But and making it work in your school is up to you. But generally that means freeing your teaching only for a day a week, and maybe offering supporting a couple of teachers joining us as a learning design team. It's a small cost, I think, for like really high quality PD and a really strong curriculum that's constantly being refined, and really good, really powerful planning.
Yeah,
I think
we're not afraid to get rid of some units if they don't work. If teachers are telling us this isn't working.
We've heard like there's a year 2 unit that's not going too well, and so we've already started rewriting. Well, Neil's already started writing. Neil's doing this one. Neil started writing the unit that's going to replace it. So this is what the sort of thing you can do. Okay, so we don't think Victorians in year 2 is working as well as we want it to. So okay, we're going to do Castles, and Neil's already started writing that. That's ready for next year. The plan will be, and a lot of the subjects where there's choice, and don't forget there is choice. And I suppose one thing you're giving up is choice. Where you can choose your instance of civilization is to design parallel units. That's what we'll do. But for now, there are some costs to doing this, and that is having a little less choice. But I guess it's just like everything; it's not weighing it up in it, right? Okay, and of course you can visit Emma. Yeah. When everyone used to visit for the maths, didn't they? Like the maths model is a big thing. I think I quite enjoyed breaking the school timetable to make the maths work. I've enjoyed even more breaking like the map model to make maths work, right? But I couldn't do any of this without the team. I worked with loads of amazing people, and also without the leaders that back me. So Tim Mills, Jeremy Meek, and all the heads that allow us and have faith in us to do this. Let me and Neil and everybody tinker around every week, writing PD.
That's the leap of faith, isn't it? That makes or breaks.
Yeah. It feels like they've made a good bet so far. Like what's coming out of, if you measure it by what the pupils know, then it's working. Like it's absolutely working. It's from our sort of our 2 weekly deep dives. It's worked in art, it's worked in science, it's worked in history, and it's now it looks like it's working in RE as well. It's working, right? From the ERP visits, it's working. From the foundation assessments, the big quizzes, it's working. Like it's working, I think. Like so, it's probably a leap of faith. I went into it with a plan. There was a plan to get, a lot of which I came from last year. My time working across East Sussex, learning from maybe people like Ambition, our partners, how to work at scale and how to get fidelity to the things you want to do. It's all kind of come from where I've been really, and also been lucky enough to work with Sarah Constant, Neil Almond, and all the other people I get. I'm going to shout out Tim Lodge, Sam Thomas, Joe Ford, and all these other brilliant people. Put loads of smart people in a room, like good stuff happens. I get to do that every week. Like no wonder it gets improved. It's not me. I just sit there. Neil knows it's not me. I spend my whole time just like faffing around, not be able to operate technology.
I teach you how to Control C and Control V.
I learned this last week.
All the shortcuts.
Anyway, I hope that was really interesting.
No,
I'll do a proper talk on it soon. And Neil and I we'll put some together that makes more sense. Yeah. But I hope it's a decent ramble. And well done with today. It's really great. I've enjoyed it. I'll stay on. I won't stay on, but I'll.
Cheers, Matt. I mean, very few people think more deeply about education than you guys do, and I love hearing what you're thinking about. And even though it's the second time I've heard you talk about this particular model, I'm thinking, going, oh my goodness, I need to do another hour with you. So hopefully we'll get that.
We'll do a proper where I'll have some slides or something, right?
Thank you very much for your time, guys, and I'll see you.
Happy New Year, everyone.